My name is Jocelyn, and let me introduce you to my family, though I wouldn't call it a picture-perfect one. There's my mother, Sabrina. And yes, before you ask, her name fits her personality a little too well. She's all about her career, her independence, and making sure nothing stands in the way of her ambitions. Then there's my father, Jasper, whose parenting skills are about as effective as a screen door on a submarine. My sister, Zoe, is 14 years older than me and has never shown the slightest interest in my existence. To put it plainly, I wasn't exactly a planned addition to this family. Mom was 42 when she realized she was pregnant. At first, she mistook the symptoms for menopause, life's cruel little joke. By the time she dragged herself to a doctor, it was too late for any alternative choices, if you catch my meaning. From what I've pieced together over the years, their conversation must have gone something like this. Jasper, what the hell are we going to do? Mom probably paced around their bedroom in frustration. And Dad, ever the spineless wonder, likely just shrugged. I don't know, Sabrina. Maybe we should talk to my dad? And that's how Grandpa Finn got involved. He lived in Canada, wealthy and far removed from our everyday chaos, but he flew down to play peacemaker. Sabrina, Jasper, listen, he must have said, calm and rational as ever. I know this isn't what you planned, but this is happening. I'll help you financially. Just give this child a chance. Mom, ever pragmatic, probably sighed and rolled her eyes before giving in. Fine, but this kid isn't going to ruin my life. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I, Jocelyn, came into existence, unwanted, unexpected, and immediately categorized as an inconvenience. I was born premature, with an assortment of health issues that kept me in the hospital more than at home. Mom hardly ever showed up. Between her career and her social life, she couldn't be bothered. The responsibility of keeping vigil over my fragile existence fell to Dad and my Aunt Helena. Now, Aunt Helena, she was different. A true saint if I ever met one. She never had kids of her own, never married, but she clung to me like I was the only thing that mattered. While Mom was probably off making deals and climbing the corporate ladder, Aunt Helena was the one whispering reassurances through the incubator's tiny openings, holding my delicate fingers and willing me to fight. Eventually, I was discharged from the hospital and brought home. That's when Grandpa Finn stepped in again. Apparently, our house wasn't suitable for 2 kids, so he bought us a bigger one. But growing up in that house wasn't like living in a warm, bustling home. It felt more like existing in a museum. Look, but don't touch. Speak, but not too loudly. Be present, but never be a disturbance. It didn't take long for me to realize that I was nothing more than an unplanned addition, a shadow lurking in the background of their lives. Mom and Dad were always working, and when they weren't, they made it painfully clear that I was draining the life out of them. We had a rotating cast of nannies, some kind, others indifferent, but none of them stayed long enough to leave a real impression. As for Zoe, my so-called sister, the 14-year age gap between us might as well have been a canyon. She never pretended to care about me. To her, I was just an annoyance, an extra body taking up space. I remember one time when I was about 6 years old, watching her get ready for college. I hesitated at the doorframe of her room, curious. Zoe, can I watch you do your makeup? I asked hopefully. She barely spared me a glance before responding dismissively. No, Jocelyn. I'm busy. I shuffled my feet, trying again. But I don't want to play alone. Can't we do something together? That was enough to break her patience. She slammed her mascara down on the dresser and turned to glare at me. Look, we're not friends, okay? I'm not here to entertain you. Go bother Mom or Dad. That was about as deep as our sisterly bond ever went. And Mom? She was even worse. Every evening when she got home from work, the routine never changed. She'd step inside, kick off her heels, and head straight for the liquor cabinet. Mom. I'd call out, my little heart lifting at the sight of her. Can we play a game? Or read a story? She'd pour herself a generous glass of wine, letting out a deep sigh. For God's sake, Jocelyn. Can't you see I need some peace and quiet? Go to your room. You're old enough to entertain yourself. And Dad? Well, he had made a promise To Mom, not to me. He swore he'd take care of me if she had me. Promises are funny things, especially when they mean absolutely nothing. My father's pledge to help raise me turned out to be just empty words. He was always too busy, too drained, or just too uninterested to spare me even a fraction of his time. His go-to response anytime I sought his attention? A weary, "Not now, Jocelyn." I remember one night when I overheard them arguing about it. I was supposed to be asleep, but I had slipped out of bed, craving a glass of water. As I padded toward the kitchen, their voices caught my attention. "Jasper, you swore you'd help me with her," Mom hissed, her voice low but sharp with irritation. "I can't do this alone." Dad, exasperated, let out a heavy sigh. "And what exactly do you want me to do, Sabrina? I work all day too. By the time I get home, I'm exhausted." She's just so demanding. Asterisk. I didn't stay to hear the rest. I didn't need to. Their words were more than enough. I wasn't a beloved daughter or even a person they genuinely cared for. I was a duty, an inconvenience, a mistake they had no choice but to endure. After that, I stopped trying. Why bother? I taught myself to be independent, to shrink into the background, to become invisible. Drifting through the house like a ghost, I made sure I never got in their way, because I knew, deep down, I didn't really belong there. The only place I felt remotely wanted was Aunt Helena's home. She lived nearby, and little by little, I found myself spending more time there. Weekends, holidays, any excuse to escape. With her, I wasn't a burden. I was seen. I was heard. I was wanted. We'd bake cookies, tackle puzzles, or simply sit and talk for hours. She'd ask about school, about my friends, about what I wanted to be when I grew up, things my own parents never once thought to ask. But life has a way of shifting things when you least expect it. At 14, I was just trying to survive another day in the emotional wasteland I called home when my parents decided to hit me with news they clearly thought would excite me. "Jocelyn," Mom announced one evening, her tone unnaturally upbeat. "We have some wonderful news." Dad, practically beaming, added, "Your sister Zoe is getting married. And guess what? She's expecting a baby." I forced my lips into a smile, though my stomach twisted with indifference. "Oh, that's great," I said, pretending to share their enthusiasm. "We'll be busy planning the wedding," Mom continued, all business, not even noticing my lack of excitement. "So, we've decided it would be best for you to stay with Aunt Helena for a while." I blinked, trying to process what I'd just heard. They were sending me away, all because of a wedding? I should have felt hurt, maybe even betrayed. But the truth? It was the best thing they could have ever done for me. I kept my response measured, not wanting to give away how thrilled I actually was. "Sure, I'd love to stay with Aunt Helena." They looked relieved, as if they'd expected me to put up a fight. Clearly, they didn't know me at all. I had my bags packed in record time, barely able to contain my excitement as I practically ran to Aunt Helena's house. Months passed, and while the rest of them were knee-deep in wedding preparations, I was too busy enjoying my freedom to care. Aunt Helena and I cooked together, went on long walks, and had movie nights. She helped me with my homework, listened to me vent about school, and, most importantly, actually cared about my thoughts and feelings. Before I knew it, Zoe's wedding was just around the corner. And so was my 15th birthday. That morning, I woke to the smell of pancakes and the unmistakable sound of Aunt Helena's off-key singing from the kitchen. I grinned, slipping out of bed and heading downstairs in my pajamas. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." Aunt Helena greeted me with open arms, pulling me into a warm, crushing hug. "I have a little surprise for you." She handed me a neatly wrapped box with a knowing smile. "This came in yesterday from your grandfather." Excitement bubbled in my chest as I tore into the wrapping paper. My eyes widened in disbelief as I uncovered a brand new smartphone, the latest model. Heart pounding, I quickly dialed Grandpa Finn's number. "Well, if it isn't the birthday girl," his familiar voice filled my ears, warm and full of affection. "Do you like your gift?" "Like it?" I beamed. "Grandpa, I love it. Thank you so much." We talked for a bit before he asked a question that made my stomach sink. "So, how did your parents wish you today?" I hesitated, unsure of what to say. Oh, I haven't seen them yet. I was planning to go home soon. Silence lingered for a moment before Grandpa Finn finally spoke. His voice was gentle but firm. I see. Well, how about you do a live broadcast when you get there? I'd love to share in the moment. A strange mixture of hope and dread churned inside me as I made my way back toward my parents' house. The walk felt both impossibly long and far too short at the same time. As I turned onto our street, I took a deep breath, steadying myself before tapping the screen to start the live broadcast. Hey, Grandpa, I said, forcing my voice to stay upbeat. I'm heading to see Mom and Dad now. I cradled the phone in my hand, keeping the camera steady as I walked. Thanks again for the amazing phone. Seriously, I love it. I rambled on, filling the silence with idle chatter about my morning with Aunt Helena, the pancakes she made, and how she even sang happy birthday in her uniquely off-key way. But as I neared the house, a strange feeling settled over me, a quiet sense of unease. Well, here we are, I announced, hesitating briefly at the base of the front steps before pushing open the door. Mom? Dad? I'm home. Silence. The house felt unnaturally still, almost abandoned. My stomach twisted slightly as I panned the camera around the empty living room. Guess they're not down here, I murmured, half to myself, half to Grandpa on the other end. I'll check upstairs. I ascended the staircase, each footstep echoing in the eerie quiet. At the top, something caught my attention, my bedroom door. It was shut. That was strange. I never closed it when I wasn't home. A small frown crept onto my face. That's weird, I muttered. My doors never closed. Reaching for the doorknob, I twisted it open, only to freeze in place. The room before me was not my room. At least, not anymore. Gone were the lavender-colored walls. They had been painted over with a soft blue. My posters vanished, replaced by framed prints of cartoon animals. My bed? Nowhere to be seen. In its place stood a pristine white crib. My breath caught in my throat. What the? I gasped, stepping backward in shock. My fingers trembled around the phone, nearly dropping it as I spun in place, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing. No, this isn't right. This is my room. My space. Before I could fully process it, a door creaked open behind me. I whirled around, and there they were, Mom and Dad, emerging from their bedroom, their faces flickering between surprise and something that looked a lot like guilt. Jocelyn. Mom's voice was tight, her eyes darting from me to the phone in my grip. What are you doing here? I barely registered her words. My entire focus was still on the disaster unfolding behind me. What happened to my room? I demanded, my voice sharp and unsteady. Why is it blue? Where's all my stuff? Dad cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Well, you see, Jocelyn, he trailed off, rubbing the back of his neck. Mom, on the other hand, didn't hesitate. A bright, unnatural smile stretched across her face. We decided to give this room to your sister's baby, our first grandson. I felt my stomach drop. Dad nodded, his own forced grin appearing. Yes, Zoe's having a boy, the son I always dreamed of. His voice carried an edge of excitement that had never once been present when talking about me. I blinked, trying to wrap my head around it. But what about me? Where am I supposed to sleep? Where's my stuff? Dad waved a hand dismissively. Oh, your things? We packed them up. They're in boxes downstairs. You should take them when you leave. When I leave? A cold realization settled over me like a thick fog. Leave? The word barely made it past my lips. What do you mean, leave? This is my home. Mom's fake smile faltered for just a second before she pasted it back on. Sweetheart, try to understand. With Zoe and her husband moving in and the baby arriving soon, well, we just don't have room for you anymore. I stood there, rooted in place, my mind spinning. No room for me? No space for their own daughter? Something inside me cracked. I could feel anger bubbling up, rising past the initial wave of shock, cutting through the numbness. My hands clenched at my sides as I shook my head. No, my voice was low but firm, my entire body trembling. No, I won't leave. This is my home too. You can't just throw me out like I'm nothing. Mom's patience snapped. Her mask of sweetness disappeared in an instant, replaced by pure irritation. For heaven's sake, Jocelyn. Stop being difficult. My head jerked up, eyes blazing. Difficult? I spat. It's my birthday, and you're literally kicking me out. You didn't even remember, did you? Dad rolled his eyes, clearly over it. Your birthday? Is that what this little tantrum is about? We don't have time for this nonsense, Jocelyn. I stared at them, barely able to comprehend how cruel they were being. A lump rose in my throat, but I refused to cry. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I swallowed hard, my voice breaking slightly as I asked, "How can you be so heartless?" "I'm your daughter." Mom let out a dry, humorless laugh, her patience gone. A daughter we never wanted. The words hit like a sledgehammer. Her voice, cold and sharp, continued cutting into me. "Do you have any idea how much you've cost us? The attention you constantly demanded? We're exhausted, Jocelyn." Dad nodded, his expression a mixture of frustration and relief. "We didn't want another kid. You were a mistake, an accident. And now we finally have the family we always wanted." The final blow. I felt like the ground had just crumbled beneath my feet, leaving me free-falling into nothingness. I watched in horror as they grabbed the bags they had packed for me, without even telling me, and shoved them toward the door. Mom dusted off her hands as if she had just taken out the trash. "There. Now, take your things and go to your precious Aunt Helena." Mom's voice was sharp, each word laced with venom. "She loves you so much? Fine. Let her deal with you." I stood frozen, my body refusing to move. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Any second now, I would wake up in my bed, safe, and this would all be just some cruel nightmare. "What are you waiting for?" Dad's impatient bark shattered any illusion of hope. "Get out. We have a wedding to plan, and we don't need you here making things difficult." And that's when the dam inside me broke. Tears poured down my face as the weight of their rejection crashed over me like a tidal wave. "How could you do this to me?" I sobbed, my voice raw with pain. "I'm your daughter." Mom's eyes darted nervously to the windows. "Stop it," she hissed under her breath. "You're making a scene. The neighbors will hear." "Good. Let them hear." I shouted, my voice thick with heartbreak. "Let them know exactly what kind of people you really are." Dad's face darkened. In a flash, he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "That's enough," he growled, dragging me toward the door. "Get out. Now." And with one final shove, I stumbled onto the front porch, my bags spilling onto the ground around me. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing through my bones. I don't know how long I sat there, shoulders shaking, tears streaming down my cheeks. For the longest time, I couldn't move, just sat on the cold steps, staring at the closed door, trying to process that it was over. They had thrown me away like I was nothing. Eventually, I forced myself to stand, gathering my things with trembling hands before turning toward the only place I had left. The walk back to Aunt Helena's felt impossibly long, each step weighed down by far more than just my luggage. As I sniffled and wiped at my swollen eyes, a voice suddenly cut through the thick haze of my misery. "Jocelyn? Can you hear me?" I jolted, looking around wildly before realizing the voice was coming from my phone. My breath hitched as realization struck like a bolt of lightning, the live broadcast. Grandpa had seen everything. "Gee, Grandpa?" I stammered, fumbling to lift the phone with shaking hands. His voice came through the speaker, thick with barely restrained emotion. "Oh, sweetheart." A heavy pause. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But listen, we'll sort this out, I promise. For now, go to Helena's. We'll see each other at the wedding in a few days, okay? Try to enjoy your birthday." Something in his words steadied me, easing the tightness in my chest just a little. By the time I reached Aunt Helena's doorstep, my tears had mostly dried. The moment she opened the door, she took one look at my face, at the bags hanging from my shoulders, and pulled me into the kind of hug that held the whole world together. That night, despite everything, Aunt Helena insisted on celebrating my birthday. She invited a few of my friends over, baked a cake, and did everything in her power to make the day feel special. And for a few fleeting hours, I let myself forget. The day of Zoe's wedding arrived, and unsurprisingly, I hadn't been invited. But Aunt Helena wasn't having it. "You deserve to be there, Jocelyn," she told me firmly. And so, dressed in my best outfit, I walked into the grand reception hall beside her, feeling completely out of place. The moment we entered, my eyes found Grandpa Finn. He sat near the front, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his presence, a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. Before we even had a chance to greet him, the newlyweds made their grand entrance. Zoe beamed in her pristine white gown, her hand tightly wrapped around her husband's arm. Mom and Dad followed, their faces glowing with pride. A familiar pang twisted in my chest. The reception moved along, dinner, toasts, all the usual fanfare. I sat in silence, barely touching my food. Then, as the speeches began, something unexpected happened. Grandpa Finn stood up. "I have something to say." His voice rang through the room like a judge delivering a final verdict. A hush fell over the guests. Zoe and her husband exchanged confused glances. Mom and Dad, however, went pale. Without hesitation, Grandpa marched to the front of the room, taking the microphone from the stunned best man. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone measured but ice-cold, "I apologize for interrupting this celebration, but there is a matter of grave importance that needs to be addressed." A ripple of murmurs spread across the hall. Zoe shifted uncomfortably. Mom's fingers clenched into fists at her side. And then, Grandpa began to speak. He spared no detail. He laid it all out, the years of neglect, the resentment they harbored toward me, the way they kicked me out on my birthday. Every guest in that room bore witness to the truth, watching in stunned silence as the reality of my parents' cruelty unfolded before them. Expressions shifted, from confusion to horror, from shock to disgust. Mom tried to interject, her face burning red, but Grandpa silenced her with a sharp glance. Zoe sat frozen in place, tears spilling down her cheeks, her perfect wedding night crumbling around her. Her new husband looked visibly uncomfortable, shifting awkwardly as whispers spread through the crowd. And then, Grandpa delivered the final blow. Turning toward my parents, his voice dropped to an icy calm. "Let me make one thing abundantly clear." A pause. "I'm changing my will. Every cent I own will go to Helena and Jocelyn. Jasper, Sabrina, Zoe, you're cut off. Completely." The reception hall erupted into chaos. Mom let out a choked gasp, scrambling to protest. Dad's face turned an alarming shade of purple, veins bulging in his neck. But there was no undoing it. Their perfect world, the one they had built by casting me aside, had just come crashing down around them. Zoe wailed about her ruined wedding, but Grandpa wasn't finished. He turned away from my parents and walked toward me and Aunt Helena, who were still sitting, stunned by the spectacle unfolding before us. "Come on, girls," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "We're leaving. We don't need to stay somewhere we aren't wanted." In a daze, I rose to my feet, my legs moving on autopilot as I followed him toward the exit. I could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, some filled with pity, others with quiet judgment. But I kept my eyes fixed on Grandpa's back, willing myself not to cry. The morning after the wedding disaster, I was jolted awake by the sound of loud, insistent knocking. Still groggy from the whirlwind of emotions, I stumbled downstairs, rubbing my eyes, only to find them standing on Aunt Helena's porch, Mom and Dad. Their faces were an unsettling mix of desperation and forced remorse. "Jocelyn, sweetie," Mom cooed, her voice sugary and sickeningly fake. "We need to talk." Dad nodded, his tone trying to sound warm. "Come home, honey. We're so sorry about everything. We love you, we really do." Something inside me snapped. Love? They loved me? The same people who had tossed me out like garbage, called me a mistake, and stripped away my room without a second thought? A surge of anger flared in my chest. "You love me?" My voice was sharp, incredulous. "You kicked me out on my birthday. You told me I was a mistake." They fumbled for excuses, spouting apology after apology, each one more pathetic than the last. But as I stood there, watching them scramble to patch together a reasonable defense, realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't about me at all. This is about Grandpa's money, isn't it? I cut in, my voice flat. The slight hesitation in their eyes, the way Mom's lips pressed together, it was all the confirmation I needed. They didn't want me back. They wanted the inheritance. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Get out. Jocelyn, please. I don't want to see either of you ever again, I said, my voice shaking with anger. And with that, I slammed the door in their faces, pressing my back against it as I tried to slow my racing heartbeat. But they weren't done. Over the following days, they came back, again and again. They called. They sent emails. They even roped in distant relatives to try and guilt me into talking to them. Each time, their pleas became more desperate, more manipulative. It all came to a boiling point about a week after the wedding. I was home alone when I heard a commotion outside. Peeking through the window, my stomach dropped. There they were, Mom and Dad, standing on the porch, arguing with Aunt Helena, who had just come back from the grocery store. She's our daughter. Dad shouted. You can't keep her from us. Something inside me snapped completely. I would not let them manipulate me any longer. I stepped out onto the porch, my voice steady as I called out, Aunt Helena, I want you to be my legal guardian. A heavy silence followed. Aunt Helena turned to me, her expression softening. Then a wide, heartfelt smile broke across her face. Oh, sweetheart, I'd be honored. The very next day, we contacted a lawyer. The process wasn't easy. There were endless forms, interviews, and even a court hearing. But I had something that would change everything. The video. The same footage from my birthday, the one where my parents tossed me aside like I was nothing, became the key piece of evidence. The day of the court hearing, my stomach churned with nerves. Mom and Dad sat across the room, playing the role of concerned, loving parents to perfection. But when the video played, when their own vile words echoed through the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted. The judge's expression turned stony. When the footage ended, she turned to my parents, her voice like steel. In all my years on the bench, she said, I have rarely seen such a clear case of parental neglect and emotional abuse. The ruling was swift. Aunt Helena was granted full legal guardianship. Mom and Dad's parental rights? Terminated. As the gavel slammed down, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying finally lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I was free. Just when I thought the nightmare was behind me, Grandpa Finn called. He asked Aunt Helena and me to meet him at his lawyer's office. As we sat in the plush chairs, surrounded by mahogany bookshelves and the crisp scent of old paper, nerves coiled in my stomach. Jocelyn, Helena, Grandpa began, his voice steady, his eyes twinkling with something unreadable. I want you both to know that I've made some changes to my will. The lawyer slid a thick document across the table. Grandpa nodded. As I promised at the wedding, I've decided to leave my entire estate to the two of you. Jasper and Sabrina are officially disinherited. I stared at him. Even though he had threatened it before, I never really believed he would go through with it. As we left the office, my head spun with the weight of it all. Then, my phone rang. Zoe. I hesitated before answering, but the moment I did, her shrill voice exploded through the speaker. How could you do this to me? She screeched. You've ruined everything. I winced, pulling the phone away from my ear. Zoe, what are you talking about? Don't play dumb, she spat. You turned Grandpa against us. Now he's leaving everything to you and Aunt Helena. It's not fair. I deserve my share too. I felt a surge of anger. After everything she and my parents had done to me, after they threw me out, she still had the audacity to act entitled? Look, Zoe, I said, keeping my tone as calm as possible. I didn't ask for this. Grandpa made his own decision. Oh, please, she snapped. You manipulated him. You've always been jealous of me. This is just your revenge, isn't it? I inhaled sharply, counting to 10 in my head before responding. Zoe, I'm sorry you feel that way, but I had nothing to do with Grandpa's choice. If you have a problem with it, take it up with him. Maybe I will, she huffed. And don't think this is over, Jocelyn. You can't just waltz in and steal what's rightfully ours. The call ended abruptly. I stood there for a moment, staring at the screen, feeling a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but mostly exhaustion. And then, I made a choice. I focused on my future. With Aunt Helena's support, I threw myself into my studies. We researched colleges, scholarship opportunities, and my next steps. Sure, my family situation was far from perfect. There would likely be more drama with Zoe, my parents, and the inheritance. But for the first time in my life, I had people who truly cared about me. A loving home, a real family, and the strength to face whatever came next.